Again, hello friends and lunatics. It is my joy and pleasure this morning to introduce Belinda Gore. She's my friend and my teacher. She is a well-known doctor of psychology involved and well-known for her dream work and some work with postures and shamanism with Belinda Goodman. Please help me welcome Belinda Gore.
So, I know the theme for this month is possibility, and the thought occurred to me that imagination, which was also part of the theme, was something I could ask my granddaughter about. My granddaughter Lily is 3, and so she's my expert in talking about how big is our imagination. Lily believes that nothing we can imagine is impossible. Nothing we can imagine is impossible. Raise your hands. How many of you really believe that's true? Nothing you imagine is impossible. Some of you, great. How about this one? With God, all things are possible. That one, okay. So we realize that maybe if we're not taking so much personal ownership of our imagination, that we can recognize that our imagination is God's way of inviting us to think bigger, to trust more. And I'm always reminded that no matter how wild my imagination might seem to me in the moment, God's imagination is bigger and wilder and even better. The question then is, how big is your imagination really? So let's try this out. What's one thing you can imagine right now that you think might not be possible? Consider the world as it is. Consider the coronavirus. Consider the political difficulties that we're dealing with in our world right now, in our country, and in the larger world. Think about climate change. Is there one thing that you can imagine you think might not be possible? And you don't have to tell anybody about it, but just hold that in your mind for a moment. Because we want to peek into those spaces where our sense of possibility begins to falter. If you're like me, I get stuck on trying to figure out how something is going to be possible. Because from my limited perspective, given what I already know, it's really true that some things don't seem possible to me right now. But that's based on my limits. I get confused thinking about what I believe should happen instead of what could happen. I get caught up in how things should work out from my point of view and how other people should respond to it. Thank you very much. I teach a system called the Enneagram that speaks to 9 different personality styles. And when I teach about relationships, one of my favorite sayings is that the biggest trouble we all get into in our relationships with each other is that we believe that other people should be just like us. That we believe that other people in a way are just like us. I mean, if you are saying this or doing that, it must mean that you're thinking this, and you intend that. And what I realized from my work with the Enneagram is that you're not seeing the world in the way that I do. Even if we come from the same neighborhood and grew up with similar values, or maybe even if we went to the same school, you don't see the world the way I do. So I get in trouble believing that you're just like me, and if you're not, you should be. So what we get into is that our imaginations get all tangled up with a lot of shoulds. And there's a reason for that. So let's look into that for a moment. Neuropsychologists tell us that my granddaughter Lily and other children around her age, around 2 to 3, are technically geniuses. And the rest of you who are grandmothers, I want everybody to know that we really are right. Our grandchildren really are geniuses, at least until they're about 3 years old. And then something starts to happen. We move from this 2 or 3-year-old nervous system and mind that is flexible and adaptable, that is constantly taking in new information and integrating it all in creative ways with what they already know and what their experiences have already been. And any of you who've been around grandchildren or children or even little kids anywhere can see the aliveness with which they engage life. They are creative in the fundamental definition of creativity, in that in their nervous systems, with the nerves firing along neural pathways, they naturally make new connections. They create new paths that typically don't always work together. And so they create diversity. And big surprise that we discovered that even in our nervous systems, diversity is what makes for healthy brains and healthy lives. So here they are, being flexible, adaptable, creative, just taking in energy, taking in information, engaging. And then something happens in our brains. And we're designed for this. We're shaped by our experiences. So very early in childhood, Lily and other children and us learn to define the world based on how our parents, our families, other children, school taught us the world should be. We shape our ideas to match what's going on around us. And technically that's called socialization. Even our language does that. If any of you are bilingual, and I'm not, but I know I've got a little Spanish and a little French, and what I realize, even with that most basic difference, and those are all Latin-based languages, you have to think differently in order to speak a different language. How you describe things, the connections between things, are all shaped by the grammar that we learn. So we are learning, we're having experiences, our nervous systems are wiring. And one neuropsychologist, Dan Siegel, says what fires together when the nerves connect in an experience, what fires together wires together. So the more we do something, the more likely we are to do that again and again and again. Now, that's great for building good habits, but what also happens is something called neural pruning, just like rose bushes. So all these connections that Lily's making with the world, at some point, the ones that she doesn't get reinforced by her life in the world start getting pruned off. They're just not there anymore. And so by the time she's 20, and by the time we were 20, only 2% of the population, instead of 99% of the 3-year-old population, only 2% of the population are considered to be geniuses. And genius really means being able to take in new information and integrate it in creative ways. We sacrifice that in order to fit in. And apparently we're supposed to do that to a certain degree because that's how we're made. But we become less attracted to novelty. We prefer things that are familiar over things that are new. And we start having fears that something will happen and we won't know how to figure it out. And so we become afraid and pull back, rather than reaching out, enjoying the process of problem solving. Have you ever watched little kids, they're making stuff and they're not intimidated by the problems they come up against. And some of us really enjoy problem solving, whether we're doing crafts or dealing with a new project, but we need to cultivate more and more of that. Because the good news about neural pruning is something that finally neuroscientists discover is that we also have something called neuroplasticity. And what it means is if we start doing new behavior, we'll make new neural pathways. So whatever we want to learn, whatever we want to incorporate into our lives, we can. So the question is, how big is our imagination? How much do we naturally limit our sense of possibility? Because we've just learned, oh, don't be silly. But aren't you being naive? You don't really think that's possible, do you? And so, if we take the unity principle number 3, thank you for having shared that with me, Julie. I create my life experience through the activity of my thinking. I create my life experience through the activity of my thinking. How big my imagination is how big my life can be. So it seems to me that our spiritual practice is about keeping our minds open, malleable, available, noticing when we're encumbered by the limits we imagine. When we impose those limits, we close the doors or turn off the circuits so that we're not listening to God speaking to us. We're not allowing God to act through us. We're not allowing God to fully love us or love other people through us. The way we limit our imaginations limits what God can do through us. So what do we do about shifting from limitations to big imaginations. Couple of basics. Start by envisioning what you want. Believing that God invites us to want. But instead of what I want to get, envision how you want to feel. Envision how you want to feel during the political election. Envision how you want to feel in a world in which climate change is challenging people in a very real way in Australia today, and the rest of us. I've done work with the California Coastal Commission, and the sea level is rising, and it's a very real issue because there are houses that are having their backyards taken away. So it's like, whatever your view is, imagine how you want to feel about your world. What values you care about, how you want to be able to behave in the world. That vision is 10 on a scale of 0 to 10. So, as you envision something right now, then ask yourself, on that scale of 0 to 10, where am I right now? And maybe I'm only 1. Okay. Rather than judging myself or telling myself I should be at 8, I just allow myself to be where I am. I let go of some of the shoulds, and then I turn it over to God. So I don't have to strive. I can just recognize, what do I envision? Where am I right now? If I turn it over and listen for guidance, what's the one next right thing I can do? Just one. And so we do it. And we trust that we're part of something bigger than we can ever know, and that something's happening in the world that supports what it is we are able to imagine, what we can envision. We just might not have the power in this moment to make it happen like that. But we don't have to shut down. We just become part of asking, what's the next right thing I can do? I'm going to close with a quote from A Course in Miracles. It says, "We will not let the thoughts of the world hold us back. We will not let the beliefs of the world tell us what God would have us do is impossible. Instead, we will try to recognize that only what God would have us do is possible. Only what God would have us do is what we want to do, deep in our hearts. What we want to do. We cannot fail in doing what God would have us do. It is the will of God. And so I invite you to let your imagination grow, to be as big as God is. There's nothing to fear. Thank you.